Welcome to Business Talk right here on businesstech.co.za, where today we're taking a break from the usual doom scrolling of GDP forecasts and water-shedding schedules to talk about something refreshingly constructive, impact investing that actually works. Yes, in South Africa in 2025 with returns, and I know it sounds like I'm pitching science fiction, but stay with me here. My guest today is Gladwyn Leeuw, the CEO of E Squared Investments, a firm that was founded on the vision of the late Dr. Alan Gray and has been quietly but very effectively building an entrepreneurial ecosystem that marries purpose with performance. In an era where many funds claim to care about impact, E Squared has actually backed that up with more than R1 billion invested since 2017, over 32,000 jobs impacted, and nearly half of their 2024 investment value directed at Black woman-owned businesses. So Gladwyn, it's a real pleasure to have you on. Let's just start at the heart of the problem. In a country with sky-high youth unemployment and deep inequality, structural inequality, how do you define scaling with purpose?
Good afternoon, Michael, and thank you for having me on your show. We've started deploying capital since 2017. And during that time, we've been able to have a look at all businesses from different walks of their business life cycle. And certain things have worked really well and certain things we've failed at. But what we've decided to do as part of our strategic imperative for 2030, or our BHAGs for 2030, is we want to scale or build 500 businesses that are doing more than 2 million rand in revenue. We want to have 25 businesses out of South Africa that are valued at more than $100 million. And ultimately, we want to positively impact or meaningfully impact 10 million African lives. And so we want to do that through the power of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial enterprise or ventures being the power or the engine that will drive our economy forward. That's how we are looking at it in the long term. And so we're taking the meaningful steps in the relative short term in order to make sure that we achieve that.
And those are BHAGs indeed, big, hairy, audacious goals. And you have to be ambitious when the problems are so large. But equally, the opportunity set is the other side of those problems, isn't it? And I know you back ventures across all stages, from the scrappy pre-seed founders to Series A growth plays. What sets your approach apart from traditional VC models chasing unicorns?
So we have to thank Alan Gray and the Gray family, because in 2007, Alan Gray, the man, had the vision of selling a minority equity stake in Alan Gray, the asset manager, to E Squared. It was funded through a bank within South Africa. And what Alan Gray, the man, did was he didn't take that money and use it for his wealth or to add to his already wealth that he had. He actually took that money and he put it into an endowment that sat there just in case the dividends from Alan Gray was not able to repay the loan from the financial service institution. And by 2016, 2017, the loan was repaid, and so E Squared owns a minority equity stake in Alan Gray, the asset manager, and so we received dividends from Alan Gray. The other thing that was innovative in the way he structured E Squared was the fact that E Squared is a trust, and so we don't have limited partners or shareholders that are looking for a return at the end of the day. What will happen is any proceeds that come from our investment activities goes back into investing into our economy. And so with that structure, we also then was set a specific, what we would call a hurdle or parameters or objectives within the trustee that spoke around how E Squared is allowed to invest. And so what was also admirable about how he set it up is there's no control by Alan Gray in E Squared or the Gray family. And so we have a board of trustees that's elected and were nominated to sit and serve on our board. And so that's the entity, or the trustees are the entities that essentially will then ensure that the proper governance and governance procedures are followed within the organization. And so that's the structure. What that then means for us is we can be more patient. So, which means we can invest as early on as we need to, and we can invest. And right now, we're investing in that early stage private equities as well. So, we invest across the business life cycle. The second thing that sets us apart is we are a permanent capital vehicle. So, we don't need to create or manufacture liquidity events within the 7 to 12 year period where you would normally see in private equity and venture capital. The third thing that sets us apart is we're industry agnostic. So we're not just looking for the high tech businesses that venture capital has been you started looking at, right? We look at businesses. So we've got a bakery in our portfolio called Oh My Cake. We've got a 3D printing business called Novatech. But then we've also got we own a minority equity stake in an independent power producer, in a water reclamation business and water technology business called Mafasi. We own logistics business, so we see a lot of different economic activity in different businesses, right? And so we've managed our risk that way. And the last thing I think that sets us apart is we have not seen ourselves as a competitor to the industry. We're starting to see ourselves as an ecosystem enabler. So we've partnered with other VCs, with institutions like the SASME Fund in a fund of funds program. We've partnered with venture builders like Grindstone and Savant's Build program and Endeavor in order to support the businesses at this early stage of their business life cycle in order to help them grow and create value.
And that ecosystem approach is really encouraging to hear. It reminds me when Jack Ma was here in 2018 talking to the president at his first investment summit about how the Chinese have supported entrepreneurship, and they made entrepreneurs their everyday heroes, but they also approached it through an ecosystem approach. And, we hear more than capital is often a phrase thrown around the place, but in tough markets like South Africa, I mean, that really is encouraging to hear. What does this mean when you've got that patient capital that's even more patient than a long-term, say, infrastructure fund, and you don't have the same liquidity event moments like a private equity fund would have to, and you're a permanent capital vehicle, you don't have to go to market and continue raise funds. What does that mean when it comes to your post-investment support and what you're able to offer entrepreneurs?
So I think that's one of the things that we've been able to do. So if you think about the traditional private equity venture capital model, you work within a 2 and 20 model, right? So 2% management fee, 20% carried interest. And so what sets eSquared apart is we don't have those same parameters, although we want to and are operating in a cash efficiency and also trying to make sure a cash efficiency model, also to make sure that we are very cognizant and deliberate about what we're spending capital on in order to achieve our long-term goals. But what that then means for us is we can set up a post-investment arm to eSquared. And so we are very hands-on when we invest. And what's important about that is we've developed value creation plans or milestone-based plans. So if you are a business that's in this pre-seed investment stage of a business lifecycle, we have what we call venture builders that walk that journey alongside you from your concept into your proof of concept, from your proof of concept into your validation, validation into monetization. And we've set specific milestones, and what we have is what we call a selection and progression panel that's made up of independent individuals that sit on that panel in order to, so eSquared doesn't mark our own homework, right? And so they sit there, and what our venture builders will do is they will bring these pre-seed businesses to these panels and go, okay, these are the milestones, this is how they've performed, and essentially can they unlock the next tranche of funding. And so we are very deliberate. We set up advisory boards made up of individuals from the industry that the business is involved in order to make sure that entrepreneurs are not making the same mistakes or can overcome the mistakes that these experienced individuals would have seen already. The other thing that we do is we work with a panel of service providers that everything from finance to marketing, strategy, operations, so on and so forth, in order to provide services to the entrepreneurs that we're working with. And the last thing is that mentorship, coaching, training element. And so in the very early stage, we try to be very hands-on and try to play that role of a sounding board for these ventures. At the later stage, we have what we call value creation managers that form or fill a very similar role. And what we then do there is we try to use our network. So we are a strategic partner to the Allen and Jill Gray Group of Philanthropies. And within that, we have Allen and Jill Gray Philanthropies Africa and South Africa that takes an ecosystem approach that you mentioned, Michael. And so what I mean by that is building ecosystem partners that are involved at the very nascent all the way through to the mature. For instance, what the team at Allen and Jill Gray Philanthropy South Africa are doing, they've got a program called Makers, Allen Gray Makers, that they essentially are stimulating and encouraging, for instance, the artisan space within South Africa as an avenue for creating jobs and activity within the economy. Why I mention that is we try to use our network and the individuals that are involved within this strategic partnership in order to tap our businesses into opportunity. So for instance, we have a business called Eagle Eye in our Pathways program. That's our pre-seed program. And we help them to get access to, for instance, Go Metro, that has a logistics smart platform. And we try to link businesses that are in the green space with businesses that are, in similar spaces. So we try to create that network effect so that, one entrepreneur can help another entrepreneur, and together we can help these businesses overcome the challenges that we have within the country. So access to markets, access to finance, education and training being very, very important in our mix of services.
And, given the unique spot that you occupy, you can be almost that hub that branches out into the various spokes and catalyze through these networks huge opportunities. And I know you're big on blended capital and co-investment, and some might quibble about whether or not you kind of socializing the risks and privatizing the profits. I certainly don't see it that way when it comes to using blended capital. But what's worked well in collaboration with players like the SA SME Fund that you mentioned, Technology Innovation Agency on that 300 million rand seed fund of funds, what's really worked for you in that blended capital and co-investment space?
Eastford has one side of our business is philanthropic in nature. And so what I mean by that is we try and support nonprofit companies that have public benefit organization status. And so what we do is we provide up to 10 million rands of grants that we disperse over a 3-year period. And those businesses are involved in micro entrepreneurship to help underserved markets and create employment opportunities. So we've got the Recycling Champions program that we do with our labs. We've got the VFX artists that we've developed together with the South African Creative Industries Incubator, Saki. And so we've got a whole bunch of businesses, Memeza, there's a whole bunch of businesses I can mention that essentially are we grant money to. And so that is an important side of the business. Then we've got this side that we call venture philanthropy, where you've got a for-profit business that has a social agenda. And so, for instance, we've just invested in a company called Regionize that has skips all over Cape Town, and they employ these refuse collectors in my community. It's on a Tuesday that come and unpack the bins. And so they've employed these guys and try to pay them a living wage. And so now these individuals can go and not travel tens of kilometers in order to get to a depot. Right, they can go to these skips, deposit the refuse they've collected, and then they have commodity buyers sitting on the other side. And so we've tried to then invest equity, provide some grant, provide some debt, and so we do a little bit of a mix there. And then when you speak about like on the other end of the spectrum, we've got this partnership with the SME Fund here and the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. And what we tried to do there was we looked at the investment ecosystem. And like I described, if you think of the business lifecycle being concept, proof of concept, validation, monetization, traction, scale, growth, and then maintenance. If that's the business lifecycle, and sometimes known as the valley of death, if that's the business lifecycle, you're looking at pre-seed investment running from that concept all the way to that validation phase that I've described. You've got seed stage that runs from your monetization all the way into traction, and then you've got Series A plus type of investment that runs from that scaling all the way to that maintenance phase. And then you've got private equity that essentially will come in Series D and so on and so forth. So if you think about that relay, what should be working in the mature economy is you have venture builders, accelerators, venture studios, yeah, like I said, all of those type of interventions working at the pre-seed stage, so helping businesses through that concept and proof of concept stage of the business life cycle. They should then be handing over to seed stage investors, where these guys are investing to help the businesses get to scale. Then you should be handing over to Series A, and so on and so forth. But that relay isn't working well enough in South Africa. And so what we found was you've got lots of you've got quite a few incubators and venture studios and accelerators, and then you've got Series A plus investors waiting for de-risk investments. And so that seed stage investment side of the South African economy isn't working well. And so what we decided to do, or actually led by the SASME fund and partnered with the three partners we've mentioned, we put 100 million rand each into a pot where SASME fund will find fund managers that are investing at the seed stage and almost give them some funding in order to invest more at this really critical stage, so that we can have more pipeline that comes through and gets funding later down the line. And so when you think about it from a blended finance perspective, only because we had that partnership were we able to use government funding. So government funding together with private funding from E Squared in order to achieve those outcomes. And once again, I want to reiterate that should we receive proceeds from that, we can then take that and invest it back into the ecosystem. And that's the beauty of E Squared and how we've been set up.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic model. What I really love about it is so evidence-based. You've looked with your partners at where the gaps in the ecosystem are to say, right, this is where we need to target our intervention. It's not really a spray and pray type scenario. You've just recently released your impact report, and I used some of the numbers in my introduction. Over R1 billion invested since 2017, over 32,000 jobs impacted. What does that milestone mean to you and to the broader South African entrepreneurial ecosystem?
I think overcoming the R1 billion deployed mark is so important to us because in an environment where some entrepreneurs feel like access to capital isn't there, we want to say to the community of entrepreneurs that we really are trying to find viable solutions, and we want to invest in them. The second thing that's really important is that this is but the start of where we are. E-Squared has been largely not silent, but we haven't been in the market or boastful about the type of capital we've been deploying into the market. Last year, we deployed just over 360 million rand into the South African ecosystem. And we believe that will be but just a small, well, not small, but it will be the start of how we then start to deploy more and more capital into the South African ecosystem. And why that's important is in an economy that needs stimulus, that needs small business to start running, to create that employment. We need more transformation, equitable distribution. We need more taxpayers. And so we're saying that we want to, in our own way, contribute towards that. And so that mark of R1 billion is just, it's not necessarily the quantum, it's what it represents. It's stimulus and investment into ideas and small business that essentially, like I said in my preamble, that will essentially run or grow our economy going forward.
And we're having this conversation at a time where and Curry Fourie, the CEO of Capitec, made very public statements, Gladwyn, about our unemployment levels. But I don't want to debate whether it's 10%, 15, 20, 30. It's too high. But I think what he did unmask, and what we do have, is an innate hustler entrepreneurial culture. Now, be that from the mom and pop corner shop or someone renting out a back room to someone who's building and scaling a business and building it through that life cycle, as you spoke of, developing a minimum viable product. South Africa has that. And I think one of the stands out is 46% of your investment value last year went to Black woman-owned businesses. When I read that, I was absolutely blown away. And clearly, it's partly by design and part of the model. How are you managing that? How are you closing those historical funding gaps and extending that much needed funding to a cohort that has previously been deemed maybe too risky or unbankable? What are the lessons you can share from that success?
So what I can say is, so for instance, last year we commissioned some research, and what we found is we are operating because we can, opposite to how the traditional ecosystem is operating. So we, for every 1 rand that the ecosystem puts into a black or diverse team, so black or female business, we're putting 2 rand, right? And we wanna do more, right? And so, but we also saw that our investment in this space is going towards more infrastructure, more health, more ethic, and so that tells its own story. Whereas the other side of the space that we're operating in, we're traditionally looking at green tech, now fintech being always one of the how can I say, sectors that gets the most investment. So I say that to say this: one, by design, like you mentioned, more female entrepreneurs are involved in the side that I just spoke about, edtech and health tech infrastructure, right? Whereas you find male counterparts being involved in fintech. I'm not saying that our female entrepreneurs are not operating in that space, but we're seeing traditionally there's a skew. The other thing that I need to mention, and it's also part of our design, is really grateful for our strategic partnership with the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation. And the one thing I need to mention is Nontobeka and the team, they have done such an excellent job at sourcing the young people, whether they be scholars, and then the bursary program that they do to eventually then induct Alan Gray Orbis Foundation fellows. 80% of the individuals that come through their bursary program and getting instruction on how entrepreneurial intent and how to go about running businesses, 80% of those founders or individuals are Black individuals, and a large majority are female. Now, what we have seen in our ecosystem is more males than females are coming through into our pre-seed or investment pipeline, but more female entrepreneurs are raising bigger pools of capital because their businesses are a little bit further along. And so that told us a very interesting story, is that bigger quantums are being dispersed to female-led businesses, but more male businesses are coming through, which is something that we are investigating to see what could be contributing to that factor. The other thing that we've been very deliberate about is maybe the reason why not more Black and female entrepreneurs are getting investment is because maybe the transformation within that space. So maybe there isn't enough Black and female led fund managers on the other side, because you invest in what you know, right? So those are also things that I think the industry is trying to fix with the SSME fund and their partnership with TIA, looking at the Black Associates program, where we're trying to bring more Black and female individuals through into that fund manager space. And so there's certain things that the ecosystem is doing in order to make sure that we are accounting for and set up to service Black and female entrepreneurs. And so Eastward, already having had those lessons, and already by design having the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation feed the pipeline of entrepreneurs to us, we've been very deliberate around nurturing talent. We've got an initiative called Own Your Space for our female entrepreneurs, where we're trying to encourage entrepreneurs and in getting successful female entrepreneurs within the ecosystem to come and talk to our businesses that at the nascent phase, led by female entrepreneurs. And so we've been very deliberate around all of the interventions that we're making to make sure that our economy and our businesses that are coming through are transformed.
It's so important that entrepreneurship is lonely at the best of times, let alone when you're blazing trails almost on a generational scale as Black woman-owned businesses. So really encouraging to see the work that's going into that. There's also a strong thread in your report about responsible entrepreneurship. which sounds fancy, but I mean, what does it mean in practice, and how do you spot it in the wild?
Well, I think it's a simple principle around doing good while doing well, right? We want to make sure that the individuals that we are bringing through into our pipeline um, ha- live by a certain, well, we have certain values that drives how we operate. So long-term commitment is one, being committed to the cause and not falling in love with the product that you have, but the problem you're trying to solve. The other thing that we have is a spirit of humility, but significance. You know what I mean? So our entrepreneurs teachable, but at the same time trying to solve a big problem and a significant problem that make a big impact. The other thing that we need to speak it on is just excellence. Are our entrepreneurs committed to what they're trying to achieve? And I think we need to talk about collaboration. So how are they using their networks and so we try and use the values that drives E squared and try and identify those in the businesses that we are then eventually investing in. And so diversity and inclusion being also a very big part of that. So what does the teams look like? And so um, all of those values are driving one, how we identify our entrepreneurs, but also the values that we try and instill. So when we do make an investment, so we are very big on entrepreneurs making sure that their governance structures are right. We making sure that they take cognizance of the risks that they're taking on, that they are operating as responsible citizens within the space that they're operating in. So not how can I say, not destroying jobs or doing harm to the environment, so on and so forth. And so we try to be very deliberate around helping our entrepreneurs towards and operate in the same values that we and how we run Eastward.
And that doesn't mean you've got to sacrifice returns because you've got a 44% year-on-year growth in the fair market value of your venture portfolio. So I think we can finally put that conversation to bed. If you could change just one thing in South Africa's investment landscape today, what would it be?
I think I want to, like you mentioned, we want to get rid of the myth that in order to achieve great returns, you can't be an impact investor. You need to be ruthless at how you go about doing things. And so we're thinking, like I said before, you can do good while doing well. And so, uh, you know, going forward, if I could change one thing, I would think about how our Reserve Bank looks at foreign direct investment, specifically when our entrepreneurs are trying to raise bigger pools of capital or transfer their IP outside of the country. And what I mean by that is right now it's very onerous on the small business exchange controls, very onerous. So when international investors are looking at investing into our small businesses on the ground, they shy away from it because it's just too onerous. And that what then happens is entrepreneurs are now registering their IPs in different jurisdictions, whether it be Mauritius, the Netherlands, Delaware in the US. The UK has created a fintech sandbox. And so we're seeing a lot more of that happening. And so we're losing this IP because entrepreneurs are making sure that they've offshored their IP in order to raise bigger pools of capital a little bit longer down the line. And so if I could change one thing, I would change that.
And I think it's probably the highest return on the lowest amount of political capital that would have to be expended. And, just do it already would be my exploration of the finance minister when it comes to the next mini budget. Hopefully we'll see some movement. Thank you very much, Gladwyn Leeuw, CEO of E Squared Investments, for reminding us that investing in people with purpose isn't charity, it's strategy. And in a country like South Africa, I think probably one of the most important strategies we can employ. You can read more about this impressive impact in the full report that's linked on Business Tech. I'm Michael Avery, and you've been watching Business Talk, as always, on businesstech.co.za.